With about 25 miles of bayshore and 50 miles of coastline, San Mateo County faces one of the greatest risks in the state for damages due to sea level rise from climate change. Cities and counties are preparing now for the profound effects sea rise could have on the businesses and homes that reside so close to the bay. Throughout the county, steps are being taken to beef up infrastructure. One of the voices leading the charge is San Mateo County Supervisor Dave Pine. He is with us today to talk about the threat of sea level rise and what is being done to protect our communities. Supervisor Pine, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So let's jump right into it. What are the threats facing San Mateo County?
Well, San Mateo County is actually the most threatened county of all the counties in the state of California to sea level rise. And that's because if you look at our historical development patterns, we built to the bay edge and in many cases well into the bay. So if you think of San Francisco Airport, Redwood Shores, Foster City, so we no longer have any natural protections as the bay rises. So the question of course is, well, how much will the bay rise? And that science is always being updated, but I think there's a high degree of certainty that we could see 3 feet of sea level rise by the turn of the century. And if that were to occur, and if we didn't build any sort of defensive systems, we would have flooding all the way to 101 and beyond. So the county conducted a really extensive vulnerability analysis to look at what assets would be affected at different levels of sea level rise. So at our moderate level, which is just over 3 feet, there'd be like $35 billion of property at risk and 100,000 people in the county. And of course, all of our major infrastructure with our highways and our wastewater treatment plants and many of our transportation nodes are all in this vulnerable area. So, for that reason, San Mateo County really wants to get ahead of this and start to prepare for what we know is coming.
So what is San Mateo County doing to beef up infrastructure?
Well, San Mateo County has been tackling this problem for a couple of years now, and it's the type of problem that we're going to have to work on for many generations. It doesn't lend itself well to just like a quick fix because the bay will continue to rise and the type of investment that's needed is massive. So our first steps have been to just try to assess the vulnerabilities, which we did with our vulnerability assessment. But then we're also have a number of interesting projects that are happening across the bay shore. We can talk about the coastside a little bit later. But along the bay shore, there's actually a lot of things occurring that I think should give us an optimism that we can attack this. So for example, San Francisco Airport is developing plans to protect all their runways. And they have a plan to do that over the next 5 or 6 years. And then Foster City, as you may recall, they just recently passed a measure to raise funds to strengthen the levees in their community. So Foster City is completely protected by an existing levee, but the federal government felt that the levee was inadequate. So if the city didn't improve it, all the homeowners would have to pay very expensive flood insurance. So instead, the council, with the approval of the voters, is raising $90 million to improve those levees. And a third example is down in the South Bay, or the south part of the county, where there's a project that would go from Palo Alto up to Redwood City called the Safer Bay Project, which would be a combination of levees and restoring wetlands to provide protection. So again, to date, a lot of assessment of the vulnerabilities, but a lot of projects happening. And a third area is we're thinking a lot about how can we get cities to work together to try to address this.
Okay. How much is this going to cost? It sounds like a lot.
It will be a lot. It will be a lot. And definitely hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's one of of course, the biggest challenges is that there's no revenue source for this work. I mentioned earlier that we're trying to bring the cities together to work more collaboratively and work across jurisdictional lines. And one of the benefits of doing that would be that we would have a stronger position to appeal to the federal government for funding. So, for example, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is a major funder of flood protection programs around the country. But to actually get in their queue and to secure significant amounts of funds is quite a process. Our county to the south, Santa Clara, has been quite successful with that, particularly with respect to a project called the Shoreline Project, where they're restoring wetlands and building a new levee around Alviso in that area of the South Bay. So a lot of money. We need help from the federal government. We're going to need help from the state government. We can't fund it on our own.
And how does the threat differ based on the bay and the coast? Is it different?
It is different, and we have very different challenges. So on the coast, the amount of assets at risk is much smaller, of course, because there just aren't as many people. It's not as much commercial activity. But what we have on the coast is, and what we're facing right now is this problem of coastal erosion. You've probably seen the pictures of Pacifica with apartment buildings right at the lip of these coastal bluffs. And in fact, some of those apartment buildings have had to be removed. So these coastal bluffs have been eroding for decades. But the pace at which they erode will increase as the sea level rises. So, confronting that challenge is going to be quite different than what we face over on the bay shore. And Pacifica in particular is really facing that issue as we speak.
So on the bay shore, there's a lot of prominent businesses. Are they doing anything to help combat the sea level rise?
No, as part of our work on this issue, we've done a lot of outreach to the major businesses in San Mateo County. And they've helped in a couple ways. First off, another initiative I'm involved with, I chair the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. So what the Restoration Authority does is provides funding for wetland restoration. But that funding was not in place until recently when a tax measure was passed. It was a measure that was passed across all 9 counties, a $12 parcel tax. And the business community was very helpful in helping get that measure passed. So they were a key partner. Another example of partnership with businesses in the South Bay in connection with that project I mentioned earlier, the Safer Bay project. So this project would provide some protection to Facebook. And Facebook, when you look at the aerial map, is right on the bay. And in fact, their original facility where Sun Microsystems used to be is completely surrounded by wetlands. So they are very vulnerable. So they have partnered on this project and have made about a $300,000 initial contribution for some of the studying. But we're going to need a lot of help from the major businesses.
So it doesn't sound like it's all bad news. There's a lot of good things going on. Yeah?
I think so. I think the county has identified this as an issue and is starting to move the needle to improve things. But again, the magnitude of the task is just so large because this sea level will rise through 2100 and beyond. So it's very difficult to predict exactly what one needs to do. So one concept that is being adopted is this notion of adaptive management. So in Foster City, for example, as I was saying, they improved the levee, but they only approved it against the projected sea level rise for 2050, not for 2100. But they built it in such a way that they can expand it and improve it. So a lot of these projects are going to have to be ongoing and calibrated based on what's really happening with the real bay level.
So we're talking about projects that could go on for decades?
Decades, for sure. For
Okay.
sure. And we have some time. The sea level rise between now and 2050 is relatively modest, but after that, it really starts to ramp up. So, one area where there's a big focus around the bay is to try to restore tidal wetlands. As I mentioned, the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority has that mission. And tidal wetlands are just remarkable because they're really good for the ecosystem, but they also provide some natural protection against sea level rise and flooding. So in our county, there will be some restoration efforts down around Manuel Park in East Palo Alto, in the so-called Ravenswood ponds. These were formerly salt ponds that are now in public ownership, and they'll be restored to provide these ecosystem benefits and these flood protection benefits. So, but it's important we get some of that work done like before 2050, or else the water will be so high that we won't be able to restore them. Scientists say that these wetlands can actually kind of grow and try to, kind of stay ahead of sea level rise to some degree. So, we do want to get those going as fast as we can, and they'll be beneficial in the South County, not so much in the Mid County and the North County, where again we already wiped out all of the opportunity for much of that.
Right. People want to learn more information about what the county is doing with climate change and sea level rise. Where can they go?
I suggest you go to our website, which is www.seachangesmc.org.
Of course, the best thing people can do is take action now to prevent
Absolutely.
global warming, right? But it's good to know that there are people preparing for the damage that can be done. If you want more information about the efforts being made to protect San Mateo County against sea rise, visit seachangesmc.org or check in with your city officials. Thank you for tuning in to Take Notice, and have a safe day.